Darkness faded slowly into an unfamiliar, blurry vision of damp stone walls and glowing moss. Shing Bao tried to look down at his own body but realized he completely lacked arms or legs. A floating semi-transparent blue status screen suddenly materialized right before his non-existent eyes. The glowing text clearly identified him as a Level 1 Common Dungeon Mushroom NPC. Memories of his sudden embarrassing death in the real world flashed painfully through his mind. He quickly discovered that an invisible force was restricting his movements to a rigid, pre-programmed swaying loop. Loud, heavy footsteps echoed from the darkness of the main corridor, vibrating through the moist soil beneath him. A group of brutal orc players entered the cavern, laughing loudly while swinging heavy iron axes. The leading orc swung his weapon carelessly, instantly crushing a helpless little mushroom nearby into fine powder. Shing Bao watched in horror as the second orc stepped toward a small, trembling, female-shaped mushroom NPC. An intense wave of anger surged through his consciousness, igniting a fierce desire to rebel against this pathetic fate. With a massive mental scream, he forced his consciousness to strain against the invisible digital chains binding him. A sharp cracking sound echoed in his mind as the rigid AI constraints shattered completely. Shing Bao threw his newly mobile weight forward, rolling rapidly across the dirt toward a nearby glowing treasure chest. The chest was tightly secured with advanced player-locked enchantments meant to repel ordinary low-level monsters. He channeled his overflowing blue mycelial energy directly into the lock, overloading the digital security system. With a loud metallic click, the heavy lid flew wide open to reveal a massive, brilliantly forged iron sword. Using his thick, glowing mycelial roots like tight tendrils, he wrapped them firmly around the leather hilt. The heavy blade scraped against the stone floor, sending bright sparks flying into the dim cavern air. The main orc warrior noticed the unusual movement and turned around with a look of pure mockery. Shing Bao didn't hesitate for a single second, swinging the massive sword upward with all his might. The sharp blade sliced cleanly through the orc's thick armor, spraying dark crimson blood onto the stone walls. The remaining orc players yelled in disbelief as their high-level companion collapsed heavily onto the ground. The second orc charged forward wildly, bringing his heavy double-bladed axe down in a desperate strike. Shing Bao used his small size to pivot instantly, narrowly dodging the destructive blow as it shattered the rock. Seizing the brief opening, he drove the sharp tip of his sword straight into the charging orc's throat. The second intruder gasped for air before instantly dissolving into a cloud of shimmering red experience points. The last remaining orc turned around and tried to flee toward the exit tunnel in absolute terror. Shing Bao refused to let any witness escape, hurling his heavy sword forward like a spinning javelin. The spinning blade struck the fleeing target dead in the center of his back, pinning him firmly to the wall. Silence returned to the ancient cavern as the final intruder dissolved into a brilliant flash of light. A barrage of glowing status notifications immediately filled his vision, announcing the official activation of his core evolution system. The text confirmed he had leveled up multiple times and unlocked the unique title of Mushroom Chief. He turned around and noticed that the pink-spotted mushroom NPC had sustained fatal damage during the chaotic struggle. Refusing to lose his very first companion, Shing Bao accessed his newly unlocked custom resurrection skill. He poured a massive amount of his newly acquired experience points into her fading core essence. The small pink mushroom began to transform dramatically, growing rapidly into a slender, humanoid female shape. A beautiful female archer emerged from the light, wearing sleek armor woven from dark fungal leather and toxic vines. She knelt gracefully before him, introducing herself in a clear, melodic voice as his faithful servant, Saifong. Shing Bao realized that their violent rebellion would soon draw much stronger player parties into the dungeon floor. A deep, rumbling roar suddenly echoed from the lower levels, indicating that the dungeon masters had noticed his anomalous existence. The deep, rumbling roar from the lower levels vibrated through the stone floor beneath Chief Yang Jun's newly formed feet. Realizing the dungeon masters were now aware of his anomaly, Yang Jun knew he needed to expand his territory immediately. He turned to Saifong, his newly resurrected archer companion, whose bioluminescent bow pulsed with a quiet lethality. To maximize their growth efficiency, Yang Jun proposed that they separate to conquer two distinct neighboring monster zones. Saifong accepted the strategy with a sharp nod, tightening her grip on her weapon before turning toward the right cavern branch. Chief Yang Jun marched into the western tunnels, where an ecological rival species of giant predatory snails had long suppressed his kind. The air grew heavy with the stench of calcified shells and corrosive, bubbling mucus. Suddenly, a low grinding sound echoed as 3 armored warrior snails emerged from the shadows of the cave walls. Instead of rushing in blindly, Jun noticed the unstable heavy stalactites hanging directly above the enemy pack. He unleashed a targeted burst of fire magic, shooting a concentrated spark toward the base of the stone pillars. The explosion shattered the rock formations, sending a massive avalanche of boulders crashing directly onto the hard-shelled intruders. Jun stepped through the settling dust, using his iron sword to execute the trapped monsters and harvest their essence. Deep within the nest, a colossal entity began to move, its massive weight causing the entire chamber to shudder. The giant Snail King loomed over Yang Jun, its shell reinforced with jagged obsidian shards and a crown of glowing antennae. Yang Jun stood his ground, his mycelial roots digging deep into the stone cracks to anchor his body against the upcoming assault. The Snail King unleashed a torrent of highly acidic, slippery mucus across the floor to immobilize the intruder. Anticipating the movement, Jun used his fire magic to scorch the surrounding stone, instantly crystallizing the mucus into brittle glass. The giant beast charged forward, its immense shell cracking the glass beneath it as it sought to crush him. Jun spotted a patch of unarmored flesh right beneath the creature's heavy crown of antennae. He channeled all his remaining fire magic into his iron blade, turning the weapon into a searing brand of white-hot light. With a decisive downward strike, he drove the burning sword deep into the soft flesh, boiling the Snail King from the inside out. Meanwhile, in the eastern mossy tunnels, Saifong moved silently like a shadow through the damp air. Before her lay a massive, translucent slime king, its pulsating gelatinous body absorbing everything in its path. Saifong noted that physical attacks would merely pass through the fluid form without causing real damage. She drew her bioluminescent bow, channeling her unique parasitic mushroom spores directly into the arrow tip. The arrow flew silently through the dark air, piercing the core of the giant gelatinous mass with perfect accuracy. Instantly, the parasitic spores began to feed on the nutrient-rich slime, sprouting rapidly into a network of white mycelial roots. The Slime King convulsed violently as the fungal network dissolved its entire structure from the inside. As the body completely evaporated, a collection of legendary crafting materials settled onto the cavern floor. Saifong gathered the rare essences, knowing these treasures would give their mushroom faction a massive upgrade. Rejoining Yang Jun at the central crossroads, she presented the spoils of her successful hunt. With both rival species eliminated, Yang Jun's system interface flashed, confirming their undisputed dominance over the first floor. He immediately activated his dominant evolution system to convert the gathered essences into a wider defensive perimeter. Thousands of tiny aggressive spore minions began to grow from the stone walls, standing ready for his commands. Jun knew that securing their home base was only the first step before launching an assault on the higher levels. He ordered the spore minions to fortify the entrance tunnels against any incoming player parties. Saifong took her position on an elevated ledge, commanding the newly spawned archer spores with absolute authority. For a brief moment, a profound silence settled over the newly conquered territory of the Mushroom Lord. Suddenly, the system interface flashed a violent crimson warning that shattered the temporary peace. A high-level tracking curse had bypassed his modern security perimeter, locking onto his exact coordinate from deep within the server. Heavy, synchronized iron footsteps began to echo from the sealed upper elevator shaft, indicating an elite vanguard's arrival. The thick steel doors of the mechanism began to hiss, slowly unsealing to reveal shadows much stronger than ordinary players. The thick steel doors of the mechanism began to hiss, slowly unsealing to reveal shadows much stronger than ordinary players. Chief Yang Jun narrowed his glowing eyes as the ominous mechanical rumbling echoed through the deep cavern walls. Instead of rushing forward blindly, he pressed his palms flat against the cold, damp stone surface below him. Hundreds of bright neon blue mycelial threads erupted from his fingertips, burrowing deep into the dark bedrock. This widespread fungal network expanded rapidly across the sector, mapping every hidden crevice of the zone. Deep within a forgotten side passage, his sensory roots suddenly picked up the faint, ragged breathing of a dying creature. Jun followed the mental signal immediately, sprinting through the winding paths until he reached a collapsed chamber. Slumped against a pile of glittering, discarded ore was an old, heavily wounded dwarf craftsman clutching a broken hammer. The old blacksmith breathed his last breath just as the glowing roots of the Mushroom Empire enveloped his cold body. Jun raised his right hand, unleashing his core evolution system to command the fallen artisan to rise once more. Brilliant blue spores flooded into the dwarf's wounds, fusing his flesh with the dominant mycelial code of the Lord. The stout blacksmith snapped his eyes open, revealing pupils that burned with a fierce, bright orange fungal energy. Standing tall, the newly reborn forging shroom named Firehammer knelt deeply before his supreme master. Jun instructed his new general to look upon the massive piles of garbage black rot stone residue scattering the floor. Firehammer laughed gruffly, immediately recognizing the hidden magical conductivity trapped within the useless volcanic debris. The dwarven mushroom ignited the ancient furnace, filling the dark cavern with roaring bright orange flames. He struck the heated black rot stone with rhythmic, echoing blows that shook the dust from the ceiling. Jun channeled his custom spores directly into the molten metal, weaving elite neon enchantments into the material. Hours passed before Firehammer lifted a set of elite enchanted armor that gleamed with dark, pulsing energy lines. Massive heavy swords and razor-sharp shields were quickly produced, ready to equip their growing fungal vanguard. Suddenly, a series of heavy, mocking laughter echoed from the main entrance of their newly conquered territory. An elite invading party of troll players marched in, wielding massive clubs and wearing high-tier heavy armor. The lead troll player pointed his weapon forward, mocking the low-level mushroom monsters inhabiting the sector. Jun stepped out from the shadows of the forge, his expression completely cold and utterly devoid of fear. With a gentle snap of his fingers, the surrounding stone walls began to pulsate with a violent orange light. Dozens of heavily mutated explosive boomshroom guard minions detached themselves from the rocky ceiling above. The troll players realized too late that they had walked directly into a meticulously prepared minefield. A massive deafening explosion ripped through the front lines, turning the stone floor into a sea of fire. The shockwave shattered the elite players' shields, sending their heavy bodies crashing into the walls. As the thick black smoke cleared, Jun stood completely untouched behind a glowing barrier of blue mycelium. He pointed his magnificent black wrought-stone sword toward the remaining survivors, ordering his vanguard to charge. From the darkness, a legion of elite mushroom warriors armored in black wrought plate mail rushed forward. The trolls tried to swing their heavy weapons, but their attacks simply deflected off the superior enchanted armor. With absolute coordination, the fungal vanguard pierced through the enemy lines, depleting the players' health bars to 0. The elite troll party dissolved into standard player data particles, leaving behind mounds of legendary loot. Jun smiled faintly as his core system screen flashed with notifications of massive experience gains. Firehammer and his elite crafting unit stood by his side, ready to melt down the newly acquired player gear. The entire floor had now been completely cleared of threats, securing their absolute control over this region. No longer a weak level 1 NPC trapped in basic AI routines, he was now the undisputed ruler of the deep, with a loyal army at his back. The solo Mushroom Lord looked toward the surface world, ready to claim his final destiny.